diplomatic messaging and making sure that the regional partners are able to buy in on any potential framework deal, as well as making sure that none of the diplomatic tracks are being crossed. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, Islamabad.
President Trump has posted on social media. He says, China is very happy that I am permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm doing it for them also and the world. This situation will never happen again. They have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. We are working together smartly and very well. Doesn't that beat fighting? But remember, we are very good at fighting, if we have to, far better than anyone else. Let's go back to Ali Hashim now in Tehran. So, Ali, the U.S. is saying that their blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is fully implemented and is being enforced. What is Iran saying about it?
Well, the fact really is that the Iranians are saying a lot. We heard from the commander of the Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters, which is main headquarters in the Iranian armed forces, that if the blockade is going to be tightened on Iran, Iran is going in return to close the strait completely, close the Sea of Oman completely, and the Red Sea. And this is in relation to Iran's ties with the Houthis, Ansarullah in Yemen. And given the fact that they are overseeing the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which doesn't only close the Red Sea, but also creates difficulties for the Suez Canal, which could mean a new situation, whereas the global economy is in more and more crisis. This is actually what the Iranians are confronting the war with, turning the table on President Trump, putting more pressure on Europe, on America, and actually even on China by closing the straits, and that would mean a lot of a surge in prices. This is how they were trying to confront the limited operation narrative by President Trump. So now, with this situation going on, it seems if we are heading towards the talks back in Islamabad, these issues could be now chips on the table, and they might be more and more negotiating over them.
That's Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim live for us in Tehran. Ali, as always, thank you. Osama bin Javaid has been covering the Iran-U.S. talks for us and has more on the latest developments.
I've been told by a source that there is a major breakthrough on the nuclear front that the Pakistanis are expecting. There is messaging that has been going back and forth. We know that both sides are essentially stuck on between 5 years of no enrichment to 20 years of no enrichment, and there is a solution in the middle. There's also talk about what Iran will do with the 440 kilograms of nuclear enriched material that it has in country. There are multiple options about whether sending it abroad to a third party or bringing it down to either uranium in its natural form or up to 3%. According to these sources, there's major headway that has been made, and they're expecting that the Pakistanis are going to be able to convince Tehran, because right now the person who's meeting them is somebody who has a direct line of communication with JD Vance, and the Pakistani army chief has been speaking nonstop. And it is a double-pronged strategy. While the Iranians are speaking to the Pakistani military chief, the Pakistani prime minister and foreign minister are talking to the Saudis. Tomorrow they head to and speak to the Qataris. The day after they go to Turkey and take everybody on board. And this is apparently just to pave way for any detractors in the process.
Joining us now is Alex Vatanka, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Alex, it's good to have you with us. Thank you for being here. It appears that Pakistan is really putting on the full court press to get both of these sides to a second round of talks. As Osama was just reporting there, do you believe that Iran would be ready to soften its stance on the nuclear program in order to do that?
Riley, it's great to be back with you. Look, I think so. I don't really see why at this point, the bridge that the two parties, United States and Iran, have to overcome, that's just something that it's impossible. In fact, I think it seems very much possible. Look, if it is true, and these reports have been now floating around since the last or the first meeting in Islamabad, that Iran has agreed to suspending enrichment for 5 years. The U.S. is insisting on 2 years. And people say, well, there's a huge gap between the two, but that's missing the point. The Iranians are saying they're willing to suspend enrichment to the extent that matters, since so much of their nuclear program is destroyed anyways. But the fact is, that is what is interesting, that they are willing to freeze, suspend, put that away for a while. And that is different from the Obama deal of 2015. And that might make President Trump be able to say, this is different, this is a stronger deal. And I got the Iranians to give us something that Obama couldn't get. And he can declare victory. And that could be one way out of this crisis.
And is that perhaps the most important part of what comes out of this, the ability for the president to be able to say that he did get the better deal here?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in terms of Donald Trump's calculations, he just wants to have a deal that he can say is better than the Obama one for 2015 and walk away, because everything else will follow. The Strait of Hormuz will open, the Iranians will get sanctions relief, and, there's a lot that needs to be hammered out in terms of Iran's regional policy, what happens to Hezbollah and so forth. But those are essentially secondary to the nuclear issue, which is at the heart of it. Because, again, going back to what Trump has been saying from get-go, he cares about one thing more than anything else: no Iranian nuclear weapon. And they can't be an Iranian nuclear weapon if there is no enrichment in Iran and there is a solution to what to do with the existing 404 kilograms of enriched uranium. And again, once Iran goes down the path of nuclear concessions to the United States, I can't see the fate of the 440 kilogram enriched uranium being something that's impossible to, one way or another, find a compromise around.
Iran said that the last round of talks stalled because the U.S. demands were too rigid. Do you see the U.S. side being able to be a bit more fluid on this particular issue? Because as much as the president would like to come away with the win, certainly I'm sure the Iranian side is also looking to do the same thing, to not be looking as though it's capitulating in these negotiations.
So you're right. So much of this is about optics, and everybody wants to, both sides want to look like the winners, but end of the day, they're not talking, Vice President J.D. Vance is talking about a grand bargain. He had just had 21 hours of direct negotiations with the Iranians. We have entered a new era of diplomacy between these two countries that have had bad blood for 47 years. And if they want to build on it, here's an opportunity to build on it. And by the way, the alternative of diplomacy, as we all know, is return to warfare, which is something both Tehran and Washington clearly don't want to see happen.
You mentioned earlier that if they manage to make this deal on the nuclear program, that perhaps, the Strait of Hormuz will open, the other details will be able to be worked out. But if Iran insists on keeping some control over the Strait of Hormuz, does that then become the sticking point in these negotiations?
It can be. Iran has to be willing to give up that control of the Strait of Hormuz. It has to focus far more on the benefits of Iran returning to the global economy, which is something they've insisted on for so long. So if Iran wants to look at the big picture, it can look at the narrow and look at it in terms of revenue from controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It gets certain billions of dollars a year in revenue, but it will be still an outsider in terms of the regional economy and an outsider in terms of the global economy. That's not what they want. They're seemingly saying they want to be rejoining the global economy, which means they need to look at the big picture. They can't be seen as taking the global economy hostage through the control of Strait of Hormuz. They need to give that up, but in return, they can seek and be a party to and benefit from free flow of trade into the region with sanctions lifted on Iran. Again, we're not even close to that point, but that's the sort of promised land, if you will, where Iran could be going if diplomacy succeeds.
Alex, I got to ask where you think that Israel fits into this at this point. The negotiations are between the U.S. and Iran. Israel says they are in contact with the United States about these talks that are happening. But will it have a say in any concessions that are being made here?
Look, my bottom line on the question of Israel is the Israelis really want to see regime change. They wish the United States will stay in this war and topple the regime. But at this point, I think Israel has figured that that's not where Trump is going, that he wants an end to this war. And Israel might have to make some tough decisions in terms of what to do next, particularly vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon. But I think fundamentally the United States is still in a position, if it can see a deal with Iran being beneficial, is still in a position to get the Israelis to back away and essentially don't do anything to jeopardize the diplomacy that Washington and Tehran right now are trying to pursue.
Alex Vatanka at the Middle East Institute, it's always good to have you with us. Thanks for being here. Israel's prime minister says he's told the military to continue its invasion in southern Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu says the military is striking Iran's ally Hezbollah as part of a plan to put in place a security zone in the south. On Wednesday, the Israeli army intensified its airstrikes and artillery shellings on towns and villages in southern Lebanon, resulting in the killing of 4 paramedics. Since the beginning of March, Israeli attacks on Lebanon have killed more than 2,000 people. More than 1.2 million others have been forced out of their homes. Nida Ibrahim is following developments for us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nida, we've been hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the ongoing operation in southern Lebanon. What is he saying?
Well, he's saying that he wants and ordered and instructed the troops to enhance the security buffer zone that he was talking about in the past in southern Lebanon, and as well as highlighting the fact that negotiations and talks with Washington are still going to ensure that the Israeli position is being taken into consideration vis-a-vis the war on Iran. It was a short message, but it seems he's directing it to his domestic audience. This is a man who promised his people at the beginning of the battle with Iran that he would change the regime, he would change the Middle East. But now, as talks continue to potentially extend and expand the ceasefire, he finds himself in a difficult position, and that's why he needs to show force, strength, defiance when it comes to the battle in southern Lebanon. So far, the Israelis, yes, have been cracking down on Hezbollah, but they have not been able to provide their audience with an achievement in that war. That's why he wants to ensure to the public, wants to reassure the public that the battle would continue, that they are still interested in keeping lands to maintain the security of what they say, maintaining the security of the communities in northern Israel. All of that cannot be taken out of the context that we are looking at elections towards the end of this year, and Netanyahu wants to stay in power. And because he has not been able to achieve these goals that he promised the Israelis with, now he finds himself wanting to sabotage these talks to begin with, but also to try and show force inside Lebanon as a way to keep his population supporting him.
Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim reporting live from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thank you, Nida. Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel wants to dismantle Hezbollah, and it will not consider a ceasefire unless the Lebanese government takes steps to disarm Hezbollah. On Tuesday, Washington hosted the first direct talks between Lebanon and Israel, but Hezbollah says talks with Israel are unacceptable, and it risks deepening divisions in Lebanon.
Does the government not realise the danger of what it's undertaken? And does it understand that it's entered a wrong path that leads only to increasing the rift among the Lebanese? It has obtained nothing from the enemy except praise without achieving any demand. Shouldn't this government reconsider its calculations and abandon this course? We want a complete ceasefire. We don't want to return to the era before March 2nd of assassinations and attacks. We must enter a new phase. It's true that we are paying a price, but this price is paid to secure a safe and stable future. We want this aggression to cease in all its forms.
Malcolm Webb joins us live now from Beirut in Lebanon. Malcolm, Israel's military chief says that he has ordered areas in the south to be turned into a Hezbollah kill zone. What is that likely to mean in practice there?
Yeah, he said that on a visit earlier on Wednesday to frontline troops. Now, Israel's previously suggested that it wanted to occupy the entire area up to the Litani River, which is about 30 kilometers north of Lebanon's southern border with Israel. It hasn't succeeded in doing that over the last 6 or so weeks of fighting. It's met resistance from Hezbollah, and there's been heavy fighting continuing in the last hours in some villages on southern Lebanon's eastern border with Israel, and also on the southern border. Netanyahu said that the fighting that's been going on for a couple of days around the city of Bint Jebel was continued. He said that the Israelis have nearly taken it. Now, this city's just about 5 kilometers from Lebanon's southern border with Israel, and its significance is possibly more symbolic than it is strategic. Netanyahu described it as Hezbollah's capital. It has a population of tens of thousands of people, and the heavy fighting's been going on there, we understand, since Monday, if not before. There have also been airstrikes near Tyre, and the violence has continued. The Lebanese Ministry of Health, as you mentioned, said that 3 paramedics were killed, another one's missing, and this followed, according to the Health Ministry, repeated airstrikes on paramedics who were trying to rescue people who've been injured in an Israeli airstrike earlier in the day. So the fighting's continued across the south. No sign of a ceasefire there.
Malcolm Webb reporting live for us from Beirut, Lebanon. Malcolm, thank you. U.S. Central Command says its forces have stopped maritime trade to and from Iran's ports. The blockade in the Strait of Hormuz applies only to vessels that are entering and exiting Iranian ports. Ume Kulsum Sharif explains how it's being implemented.
The Strait of Hormuz is at the center of a high-stake battle of blockades. Now, for more than a month, Iran restricted traffic through this waterway, right? This week, the U.S. imposed a blockade targeting Iranian maritime traffic. Now, all the action is taking place here in Iran's southern coast, which is a long stretch. A rough measurement tells us it's more than 1,400 kilometers and has several important ports along its route. At its center is the Strait of Hormuz, the sole maritime exit from the Gulf, and in the past month, Iran has allowed a few dozen vessels to pass through, but hundreds remain stuck here. On Monday, the U.S. imposed a blockade targeting traffic to and from Iranian ports. Now, the U.S. military says it involves more than 10,000 U.S. troops. Now, the U.S. says its blockade is complete and is working, and it's intercepting and turning back several vessels along the way. Now, this image is from maritimetraffic.com that lets us track vessel movement in real time. But the U.S. has not disclosed where its ships have been deployed, so it's hard to say where the interception of vessels is likely to be. Now, U.S. warships are not likely to be close to Iran's coast due to the possibility of drone and missile attacks. So the interception could likely be here in the Gulf of Oman, a major transit for global oil and Iranian exports. It could be further down here in the Arabian Sea. Now, Iran says the U.S. blockade is piracy and has threatened to retaliate. In the past month, we've seen Iran strike energy infrastructure strikes right across the region. China, which is a major buyer of Iranian oil, has also said the U.S. blockade is dangerous and irresponsible. Up until now, Iran has allowed several Chinese vessels and a few others to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Finally, a warning from the International Monetary Fund, which says that if this conflict escalates, this is where we are headed, a global recession.
Dania Dhafar is the executive director of the Gulf International Forum, a think tank that is based in Washington, D.C., and she joins us here in the Doha studios. Thank you, Dania, for being with us. We've been talking tonight about the sort of chessboard of diplomacy that is happening, not just between Iran and Pakistan and the United States, but also with other people who are affected by this. Now, before we get to the question, we've also now heard that the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, received a phone call from Donald Trump today. The two discussed the developments and the global energy markets, the issues with supply that are happening, which was expected. They've also talked about intensifying international efforts to prevent further escalation and prioritize diplomatic means. This is an additional point to the flurry of diplomatic activity that we've been seeing, and that includes the regional Gulf partners. What does that tell you?
Well, I think the flurry of diplomatic activity is a positive sign that means that something is happening behind the scenes between all of these important actors. And this seems a little bit different than the first round. So it could be a positive implication that there could be a more substantive, longer-standing discussion between Iran and the U.S. in the upcoming negotiations, and that all parties want to make sure that their interests are being brought to the table in a way that makes sure that this kind of escalation doesn't happen again. And of course, from the Qatari perspective, we have to say that Qatar is one of the Gulf states that's within the Strait of Hormuz. And all of its gas imports and or exports go through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's really important for Qatar's economic well-being. And it's actually only landlocked by Saudi Arabia. So it only has one area in which they can import and export goods aside from through the air. And so therefore, this has been incredibly important for Qatar's economic and political security. And I'm sure that His Highness the Emir went forward and brought forth the concerns of Qatar. And I'm sure that, you know, President Trump is trying to, in some way, try to placate the Gulf states about what's going to happen next. Because even Trump himself is invested in the Gulf, and the Gulf states have agreed to trillions of dollars of investments in the U.S. So the Gulf states are important to Trump. And actually, Trump's foreign policy is really focused on the Gulf. It's one of his linchpin subregions, globally speaking. It was his first visit as president. And I think he's also very interested in maintaining good relations with these countries.
And there is also, of course, the fact that these Gulf countries that are being affected by this blockade right now are a huge part of the global economic issues that we're seeing right now. The fact that they cannot move product out to who needs it, the oil, the petrochemicals, fertilizer, helium, all of those things. How important is this to the Gulf countries that this blockade does not last any longer than it needs to? And the world, the rest of the world as well, that is waiting for the stuff that is coming out of the Gulf.
Right. The longer that this crisis continues, the harder hit will be the Gulf economies. And not all of them are hit equally. For example, Saudi Arabia is still exporting its oil 7 million barrels a day at a higher price.
Because it has the pipeline.
Because of the pipeline, and it goes through the Red Sea, so they're bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. But for other Gulf states, this is an important economic lifeline, and it's a matter of security as well. And so the longer this lasts, the more costly it is for the Gulf, and it's the longer it lasts is also more costly for the international community. And the Gulf is an important choke point globally for energy issues. As I mentioned earlier, 1/3 of the helium comes out of the Gulf. For important commodities for food security globally. And I would also like to mention that the global South is actually suffering the most from this. So a lot of South Asian countries and African countries are suffering significantly because of this war. And so it's also been very hard on other countries aside from, you know, Europe, Asia Pacific, and the U.S. And it's also been tough for the U.S. as well.
Absolutely. With everything that we've seen, how likely do you think it is that, one, this second round of talks is going to happen, and two, that Iran and the U.S. are going to be willing to soften their stances enough on these key issues of the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear deal to come to some sort of agreement?
Well, I do think there is an interest for a second negotiation. I think President Trump is very interested in being the deal maker. And as I mentioned earlier, he wants a deal better than the JCPOA. The question is what's going on on the Iranian side? To me, it looks quite positive. The fact that they have not used any sort of aggression against the U.S.
right now as the U.S. is blockading them, and that, again, the Houthis haven't attacked the Red Sea. That, I think Iran wants to see what's going to happen in that negotiation. So maybe they'll meet in the middle. I think the key issue is going to be about uranium enrichment and the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran is also looking for some sort of economic benefit out of this, because Iran is being squeezed very hard, economically speaking, more than it was before, especially with the Strait blocked.
Right. And that's been something they've been dealing with for many years now. Dania Dhafar, Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
This is Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the ceasefire and the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Here's a reminder of the latest developments. A Pakistani delegation led by the Army Chief and Interior Minister has arrived in Iran. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying to end the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. The delegation is set to deliver messages from the United States. The White House says the U.S. is not seeking to extend the ceasefire agreement with Iran, which expires in a week. The latest diplomatic push follows heightened tension in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's army has warned it will block trade through the Red Sea, as well as the Gulf and Sea of Oman, if the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports continues. Israel's prime minister says he's told the military to continue its invasion in southern Lebanon. His chief of staff said the area south of the Litani River will become a no-go zone for Hezbollah. On Wednesday, the Israeli army intensified its airstrikes and artillery shelling on towns and villages in southern Lebanon. From Malawi to Mozambique, many African countries are feeling the impact of the disruption to global energy supplies. Kenya has raised fuel prices, with the cost of diesel hiked by a record 24%. Catherine Soy reports from Nairobi.
This is a fuel queue in Mozambique. Motorists say they spend hours looking for diesel or petrol in the capital, Maputo.
It's chaotic because I went to 4 or 5 fuel stations, but there was no fuel. Sometimes there is petrol, but no diesel.
Next door in Malawi, the same frustrations. Fuel crises here are nothing new. In January, petrol and diesel prices went up by more than 40%. The landlocked country imports fuel through Mozambique, itself strapped for fuel. The US-Israeli war with Iran has just made things worse.
Fuel scarcity at the moment is a serious problem compared to the past. It has come to a point where you can spend 2 days at a gas station but not find fuel if you are unlucky.
In Kenya, more of the same. The problem here is compounded by people hoarding fuel. This is what we were all worried about. Fuel prices have gone up. Diesel, for example, has shot up by a margin that has not been seen in the country for the last 21 years. The government says it has enough fuel to run the country for the next couple of months, but a lot of people are worried about the ripple effects. The Kenyan government recently reduced taxes on petroleum products by 3%, but it hasn't helped, people here say.
We will not increase the bus fare right now, but we're the ones who will suffer because we'll take in the added cost. People don't have money.
The International Monetary Fund warns that many African countries are unable to protect their people from the effects of the global energy crisis. Debt and inflation will most likely go up, and so will the cost of living. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Nairobi.
The lawyer for prominent Palestinian prisoner Marwan Barghouti says he has been tortured in Israeli custody. Barghouti has been in prison for the past 24 years. His family has previously accused guards of abusing him, which Israel denies. Barghouti was among several high-profile Palestinian prisoners Hamas wanted released during the U.S.-brokered Gaza ceasefire deal, but Israel refused to include him. We can now speak to UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, who's joining us now live from Tunis. Thank you very much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. You've released a report recently about just this sort of thing, the use of torture in Israeli prisons against Palestinians, and I want to ask you about that further. But first, when you look at Marwan's case here, he has a lawyer, he's a very prominent figure. If this is something that his lawyer is saying is happening to him in prison, what happens to those in detention that do not have any spotlight on them?
No, exactly. This is the case of Marwan Barghouti is revealing of a system of profound moral and legal decay. Look, I've investigated torture in Israeli prisons for quite a while now, and this is why I decided to write a report about that. But last year, both the Commission Against Torture reported that torture was becoming a state practice, and also the Commission of Inquiry of the UN on Israel and Palestine concluded that Israel was committed acts that would amount both to torture and acts of genocide against the detainees and inmates. What I found through interviews and reports I received from survivors and their lawyers is that torture is absolutely institutionalized, enabled by law, shielded by courts, normalized in public discourse. And there are two aspects that I would like to highlight. On the one hand, in prisons, there is repeated beatings, punitive transfers, prolonged isolation, starvation, medical neglect, psychological torture, and a lot of sexual abuse and rape. All this is to break the spirit of the prisoners as human beings. And what I found extremely disturbing is the gamification of sexual abuse and rape by people, by soldiers, through metal objects, through trained dogs. And this has been done over countless prisoners. Now there are 10,000, but around 20,000 Palestinians have been imprisoned over the past 2 years. And the thing is that also beyond the prison walls, there is an entire torturous environment that is imposed on the Palestinian people. The homes reduced to rubble, hunger used as a weapon. So Israel is really torturing the Palestinians as part of the genocide that is inflicting on an entire people. And it's extremely worrisome.
So Francesca, you put a report together like this with all of this detail. You're putting it on the record, but what happens after that?
What should happen is that member states take a serious look at these documentations that come not only from me and others in the United Nations, but from Palestinians and Israeli human rights organizations. The documentation is countless, and because torture is absolutely provided, there is state and criminal individual responsibility for that. So at a minimum, member states should impose sanctions on individual members of the government, and the International Criminal Court should investigate and prosecute those who are already identifiable as at the top chain of command. Like I've identified Ministers Motrich and Minister Ben-Gvir as two of the Israeli senior political figures that must be seriously investigated and indicted. And but of course, there is for torture, there is one of those crimes for which there is the possibility to activate domestic courts in many countries. So I do hope that the survivors and their families will take legal actions against the State of Israel, against those who have provided the tools to Israel to commit this violence. Especially there are European countries which are transferring or selling trained dogs, like military dogs that are being used for abuse, including rape against Palestinian inmates. This is really shocking.
Do you think that any of that is likely to happen?
It must. It must happen. It's going to happen if there is enough pressure that comes from the people. Clearly, we are at the moment of extreme darkness and sense of powerlessness among the people, because those in power, especially in so-called liberal democracies, seems to be otherwise occupied. Gulf countries, Arab countries are trapped in a spiral of fear and confusion because of the war that is ravaging the region. And everyone seems to be caught up with their own problems. But again, Palestine is not going to, it's going to haunt us forever. We need to stop this. So I call upon everyone to take responsibility and make pressure on governments to stop this. In Europe, there are signals that this can happen. In the US as well. More needs to be done, of course.
UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, thank you for being with us on Al Jazeera. Let's take a look at some of the other major stories happening around the world. At least 8 children have been killed after a teenage student opened fire at a school in southeastern Turkey. Police say a teacher is among the dead. The attack comes a day after a separate school shooting in a nearby province injured 16 people. Sinem Kosolu reports from Istanbul.
Fear and confusion outside the school in the city of Kahramanmaraş. As ambulances rush in, families are trying to understand what's happened. Emergency responders secured the area and took the injured to hospital. Some parents are in tears, waiting for news of their children. Authorities say the suspect was a 13-year-old. The shooter entered 2 classrooms armed with 5 guns and 7 magazines. Police say they believe those weapons belonged to his father.
Our investigation is currently ongoing. We hope that the injured will soon recover. There are no reports of shootings at any other schools.
Unverified social media footage shows the school from the outside in the moments after the attack began, with students jumping from windows as gunshots ring out. This comes just a day after a former student opened fire at another school in nearby Şanlıurfa province. The suspect wounded at least 16 people before killing himself. Authorities have launched a nationwide investigation. They've also imposed a broadcast ban limiting news coverage of the incidents.
School shootings had been rare in Turkey, but after 2 just in 48 hours, the country is being forced into consider difficult questions like guns in the home, youth mental health, and school safety. For many, this doesn't feel like isolated violence, but instead like a warning. Sinem Kosolu, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
Nigeria's defense minister has attended the funeral of several senior military officers killed in a surge of Boko Haram attacks in the northeast. The officers were laid to rest in Maiduguri as armed groups intensify violence across the region. On Monday, Boko Haram fighters stormed an army base in Monguno, north of Maiduguri, killing a commander and 6 soldiers. Ahmed Idris has more from Gubbio in northeastern Nigeria.
This is as close as the military says it will allow us to Jili, where last weekend bombardment killed dozens. We're a few kilometers outside of Gubbio, and the mood in this particular area is that of fear and anxiety. Fear of Boko Haram attacks, fear of saying anything that could implicate them. We were told by the security forces that that area is inaccessible for the time being, simply because of the threat of booby traps, threats of ambush and landmines being planted by the Boko Haram fighters. This highway in particular is considered the highway of death just a few years ago. It leads to Damasak and several areas like Abadam up to the border with Niger Republic. And these areas, you find a lot of Boko Haram fighters. In fact, the security forces are saying that these fighters come to the markets and stock up on supplies. Now over here is the last military checkpoint that is the barrier between Gubbio and Jili and other areas that lie beyond. Jili, by the way, is a village that lies on the border of Yobe and Borno State, and there have been several incidents in that particular area. And despite that, traders find their way to that market because we are told that business is lucrative there. A liter of petrol, for example, sells 4 to 5 times more than what is obtained in regular markets and filling stations. This particular roadblock is the last checkpoint between Gubbio and Jili. And anything that lies behind here, we are told, is dangerous territory because of the security threats that lie along the way. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera in northeast Nigeria.
International donors have pledged more than $1.5 billion worth of aid for Sudan at a conference in the German capital, Berlin. But the Sudanese government says it rejects any outcome of the meeting because it wasn't consulted. Dominic Kane reports from Berlin.
Representatives from Sudanese civil society and leading international partners met in Germany to discuss what the UN has called the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. But neither the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, nor the Sudanese government were invited. The official view in Khartoum is that this conference was a surprising and unacceptable interference in its internal affairs.
We, the people and government of Sudan, we strongly note with concern the exclusion of Sudan from the Berlin Conference. Such approach creates an important impasse. Why? Because it contradicts the fundamental principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations.
The German host said it was essential.
It's a necessity appealing to our responsibility as the states and actors who are able to create change, to send a message to the people of Sudan that we stand by their side.
European countries reiterated calls for a ceasefire and promised more humanitarian aid. Overall, international donors pledged more than $1.5 billion for Sudan. The African Union said the wars in Iran and Ukraine had distracted from the conflict.
The lack of media coverage of what's going on in Sudan is something which is unfortunate. And the most disastrous humanitarian catastrophe is right now unfolding.
The UN's Human Rights Commissioner told me pressure needs to be put on the rival foreign powers who back the RSF and the government.
It's not only the two warring parties that need to be held to account, but all those who support them. And I hope that this conference can bring that to the table and can also put pressure on all the ones who are benefiting from it.
Set against that hope is the thought that this is the third such conference for peace in Sudan in the past 2 years, and neither previous gathering brought an end to the fighting. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
3 years since the war in Sudan began, a conflict that has created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 34 million people, almost 2 out of every 3, now need humanitarian support. Since the war started, around 14 million people have been displaced from their homes. An estimated 19 million school-aged children do not have access to education. And nearly 70% of hospitals and health facilities in conflict areas are no longer functioning. Estimates suggest the war may have killed more than 150,000 people. Hiba Morgan reports from Khartoum.
These streets in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, were once a battleground between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. Fighting started in April 2023. That's when the RSF, once part of the military, moved its forces to the capital and the northern city of Merowe and surrounded an army airbase. The marks on buildings here in Khartoum are evidence of the war. 3 years on, life is gradually returning to normal.
The situation is better than what we have lived through the past 3 years. People have returned, shops have opened, markets are working, and we've seen relatives we haven't seen in a long time. And now I'm even back to work.
The RSF occupied large parts of Khartoum at the start of the conflict. Fighting displaced millions and killed tens of thousands of people, though there's no official death toll. This is where some of the fiercest battles took place before the army regained control of Khartoum last year. And although the sounds of gunfire and artillery shelling have been absent in the capital for months, that isn't the case elsewhere in country. The RSF is trying to take control of territories in Blue Nile State in the southeast. The attacks have displaced thousands of people in the region. In the Kordofan region, where most of the recent battles are being fought, the increased use of drones by both sides has led to civilian casualties. And the RSF siege on cities in South Kordofan has led to famine and food shortages. In the western region of Darfur, the RSF's capture of the city of El Fasher in October killed at least 6,000 people in the first 3 days, according to the UN. More than 700 cases of sexual violence have been reported, and thousands of people are still missing. The UN says the fighting in El Fasher and the RSF's conduct bears the hallmarks of genocide. Famine has also been confirmed in parts of Darfur. The war in Sudan has created what aid agencies say is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. As the war enters its fourth year, Sudan is militarily divided. The RSF controls most of the west and southwest. It has set up a government in Darfur, raising fears Sudan could split once again. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
The Democratic Republic of Congo government and M23 rebels are holding peace talks in Geneva, mediated by the U.S., Qatar, and the United Nations. There's hope that the talks could end widespread violence in the country. Alen Waikani has more details from Goma in North Kivu province, where much of the fighting is taking place.
A new round of peace talk has resumed between the DRC government and M23 rebels since Tuesday in Geneva in the presence of U.S. mediator and Qatar, this time assisted by UN and also some of the regional mechanisms here. This is in the continuation of what started already since last year in Qatar in different rounds when the rebels took control of this town of Goma here and even Bukavu. There are different issues that has been opposing the DRC government to the M23 rebels. If the government, for example, is asking the rebels to free the area under their control, rebels in their side are saying they have some of the root causes they have to discuss with the government, mainly the governance and also the corruption that they are talking about. But many rebels right now are asking for a trust measures, for example, from the government by releasing their prisoners. This peace talk has resumed while situation on the ground still very fragile. In different areas, government soldiers with their allies still fighting against the M23 rebels, accusing each other for violating the ceasefire declared by mediator CIS last year. In the area of Minembwe, for example, thousands of civilians are caught in the middle of the battle between different groups, putting humanitarian assistance in a very difficult situation to attend those victims. This is why on the ground here, people are expecting a lot that pressure from both sides of mediator will finally push the both sides to have a resolution which will be respected, as majority of them had never been respected on the ground, in order to end this conflict which is lasting for years right now. Alen Waikani, Al Jazeera, Goma, Eastern DRC.
Pope Leo has arrived in Cameroon on the second leg of his African tour. It's the first papal visit to the country since 2009. On Thursday, he'll bring a message of peace to a conflict zone in the north, where English-speaking separatists are fighting the army. Before that, he met with President Paul Biya, the world's oldest head of state, who has ruled the country for more than 40 years. Nicholas Hawke was in the capital, Yaoundé, as Pope Leo arrived.
There he is, the head of the Catholic Church, and this is his congregation. He's got a difficult job at hand to transform the church, the Roman Catholic Church, to a congregation that is changing, where churches in Europe are shutting down, being turned into apartments. Here, the congregation is expanding. It's not only expanding in numbers, there's a lot more young women coming to the church. So how can the Vatican respond to that, and how can it transform itself?
He has come to his home, to our home. I am so happy that he's here in Cameroon.
I pray because it's God who gives peace. He's the one who brings peace into the world, and I ask that he grants us that peace and eternal happiness.
Pope Leo came here 20 years ago where he was known as Brother Bob. He knows this country, and the people here know him. It is the future of the church that's being played out here. We've heard people chant and pray in their local language, not in Latin, not in Italian. Well, people here are familiar with Pope Leo. He came here 20 years ago as Father Bob, and he's here on a mission not to convert the masses, but to transform the church to the image of its future. And much of it is being played out here. People here praying not in Italian or in Latin, but using their own local language and culture to show their faith. People are running after the Pope Mobile, hoping to get another glimpse of him, because he's not just a pope for many people here. He will be traveling to the English-speaking region where there's a conflict playing out there, and many people hope that he can do what politicians have not managed to do, to bring peace here in Cameroon. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Yaoundé.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be live in Washington and Tehran as the diplomatic push continues for a second round of talks between the United States and Iran. Our extensive coverage continues in 90 seconds. Stay with us.
Who's really holding the cards that can end this war? Now President Donald Trump is looking for an off-ramp. Join me, Steve Clemens, every week where I'll bring you the latest analysis on the global fallout of this conflict. Pull apart fact from fiction and get to the bottom line.
Your weekly take on U.S. politics, The Bottom Line.
Hello, I'm Rob Matheson, and this is Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the ceasefire and the war between the US, Israel, and Iran. The latest this hour. A high-level Pakistani delegation arrives in Tehran. It's the latest diplomatic push to end the Iran war. The U.S. military says it's successfully enforcing a blockade on Iranian ports, but Tehran claims some of its vessels have crossed the Strait of Hormuz. Also ahead, a day after direct historic talks, the Israeli army orders a Hezbollah kill zone in southern Lebanon.
And does Iran have an economic breaking point, or will Donald Trump blink first? We'll look at the shifting strategies of the White House when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. That's later this hour on This is America.
Plus, the nightmare must end. The UN chief calls for peace in Sudan and an end to the civil war as it enters its fourth year. So diplomatic efforts to end the war between the US, Israel and Iran are intensifying. A Pakistani source has told Al Jazeera there's been a major breakthrough on Iran's nuclear program. A Pakistani delegation is now in the Iranian capital. Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir and Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi are leading that delegation. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Esmail Paghei, says Tehran and Washington have been exchanging messages since talks in Islamabad ended on Sunday.
Regarding the talks, the exchange of messages continues. Since Sunday, when the Iranian delegation returned to Tehran, several messages have been exchanged through Pakistan. Our positions have been expressed in those exchanges.
Well, Pakistan's Prime Minister is also trying to instigate a second round of negotiations before a temporary ceasefire expires in 1 week. Shehbaz Sharif arrived in Saudi Arabia as part of a regional tour that includes stops in Qatar and Turkey. The US military says it's turned back 9 ships in the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM says the vessels were ordered to return to Iranian ports or to coastal areas. And meanwhile, the White House says the US is not seeking to extend the ceasefire agreement with Iran, but negotiations continue.
I saw some reporting, again, bad reporting this morning, that we had formally requested an extension of the ceasefire. That is not true at this moment. We've remained very much engaged in these negotiations, in these talks. You heard from the Vice President directly and the President this week that these conversations are productive and ongoing, and that's where we are right now. I've also seen some reporting about the potentiality for in-person discussions again. Those discussions are being had, but nothing is official until you hear it from us here at the White House. But we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
Going to bring in Mike Hanna, who's joining us live from the White House. So what else are we hearing from the White House about a potential resumption of these talks, Mike?
Well, what you just reported there is everything that we have heard from the White House. That was the press spokesperson explaining that reports about the U.S. wanting an extension of the ceasefire are incorrect. She says that nothing is official until it comes from the White House. But she did confirm there that the negotiations are ongoing, that there is a sense of optimism about a potential resumption of these talks. She added, too, that Pakistan would be the likely venue for such talks. Interesting that there is a locale already being mentioned, which means that these negotiations, these discussions may once again be at an advanced phase. But once again, this is something we're just going to have to watch and wait and see and hear, as the press spokesperson says, officially from the White House.
And I understand that Donald Trump called the Emir of Qatar. They talked about the de-escalation of the war in Iran, also keeping energy markets stable.
Yes, indeed. Well, that particular call, the readout actually came from somewhere very close to you, from Doha, from the Emir's office. Confirming that the Emir had a phone conversation with President Trump. We haven't heard formally from the White House yet that this call has taken place. However, according to the Qatari release, yes, the conversation was held. President Trump thanked the Emir for his role in creating a sense of stability within the Middle East. They also spoke about oil production and gas production and the issues pertaining to that. Now, on that particular subject as well, we did hear earlier in the day from the Treasury Secretary in the U.S. Saying that the price of oil was unlikely to go down before the midterm elections, or specifically the price of gas in the U.S. was unlikely to drop before those midterm elections, which is potentially a major issue for President Trump and his Republican Party.
Mike, thanks very much indeed. We have a ticker just at the top right-hand of our screen there showing this current price about $94.95 for Brent crude. We're going to keep an eye on that, of course. Mike Hanna at the White House, thank you very much indeed. Osama bin Javid's been covering the Iran-US talks for us. He's got more on the latest developments.
I've been told by a source that there is a major breakthrough on the nuclear front that the Pakistanis are expecting. There is messaging that has been going back and forth. We know that both sides are essentially stuck on between 5 years of no enrichment to 20 years of no enrichment, and there is a solution in the middle. There's also talk about what Iran will do with the 440 kilograms of nuclear enriched material that it has in country. There are multiple options about whether sending it abroad to a third party or bringing it down to either uranium in its natural form or up to 3%. According to these sources, there's major headway that has been made, and they're expecting that the Pakistanis are going to be able to convince Tehran, because right now the person who's meeting them is somebody who has a direct line of communication with JD Vance, and the Pakistani army chief has been speaking non-stop. And it is a double-pronged strategy. While the Iranians are speaking to the Pakistani military chief, the Pakistani prime minister and foreign minister are talking to the Saudis. Tomorrow they head to and speak to the Qataris. The day after they go to Turkey and take everybody on board. And this is apparently just to pave way for any detractors in the process.
President Trump's posted on social media. He says, China is very happy that I am permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm also doing it for them, also the world. This situation will never happen again. They have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. We are working together smartly and very well. Doesn't that beat fighting? But remember, we are very good at fighting if we have to, far better than anyone else. European Council President Antonio Costa says the bloc is calling for de-escalation and for a deal that allows for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Since the beginning of this conflict, the European Union has been consistent in calling for the de-escalation and negotiations in full respect of international law. It is essential that all parties use the momentum created by the recent United States-Iran ceasefire brokered by Pakistan in order to address the concerns of the international community regarding Iran. That means nuclear program, of course, but also its ballistic missile program. Iran's support to proxies destabilizing the region, and the blockade of the international sea lanes.
Well, joining us now from Tehran is Abbas Aslani. He's a senior research fellow at the Tehran-based Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, Abbas, we're hearing that there is some movement on the terms, possibly, of the nuclear deal. And given that Iran does have a right to a peaceful nuclear program under the non-proliferation agreement that it signed, is it surprising, do you think, that it would be willing to make these concessions?
Well, Rob, despite the United States pushing Iran and, public, they have been pulling, Iran closer, privately. We have the Pakistan Army Chief in Tehran. They had first and preliminary round of discussions with the Iranian Foreign Minister, and they will continue those talks tomorrow in a detailed manner to discuss, U.S. views in order to see if they can bridge the gaps between the two sides. Given that there were, intensive talks between Iran and the United States at a high level in Islamabad recently, it seems that the two sides want to somehow build up on the progress that made in Pakistan, a few days ago. And this seems that, we are seeing a momentum at the moment in the negotiations, which might be pushing the two sides toward a potential understanding on the framework of an agreement. In order to nail down the details, I think more time will be needed, Rob, and that's why there have been also discussions on a likely extension of the ceasefire. However, there has been no indication or official confirmation of the both sides on accepting the extension, and now at the moment they are focusing on trying and attempting to see if they can have that agreement on the framework as soon as possible.
The US military says that it's been blocking much of the shipping that's going to and from Iran's ports. Now, obviously, a lot of Iran's leverage in this has been its ability to control parts of the Strait of Hormuz. How much of an impact do you think that US military action in that blocking of Iran's ports having on Iran's leverage as we head into what could be a second round of talks?
Well, this might be another sign that we are approaching decisive moments or hours, given that the United States is trying to create leverage to get further compromises from Tehran at the negotiating table. This is an implicit admission that the US has not been able to create that leverage in the recent aggression against the country. So that's why they want to pressure Tehran in a manner that they will avoid any return to the regional war, but to also pressure Iran economically in order to see, let's say, further flexibility from Tehran. But so far, we are not seeing that impacting here the calculus here in Tehran. And this might also complicate the situation by, let's say, any miscalculation, any action that might make things get out of control. This might also bring an escalation. This is maybe a strategy that the US wants to escalate, to de-escalate, but it does not necessarily it cannot necessarily yield any result at the moment, as we are approaching and witnessing the last-minute efforts to see whether the two sides will be able to clinch an agreement or not.
Abbas Aslani there from the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in Tehran. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is also pushing for an extension of the ceasefire between the US and Iran. Erdogan says Ankara is working to ease tensions and ensure negotiations continue.
Despite all the difficulties encountered in the negotiation process between Iran and the United States, we have not lost hope. We are making the necessary suggestions and attempts to reduce tensions, extend the ceasefire, and continue the negotiations. The window of opportunity opened by the ceasefire must be taken advantage of to the fullest extent.
Alex Vathanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. As always, Alex, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. So hopes are higher that a second round of talks could be going ahead. There is some suggestion of a breakthrough possibly with regard to the nuclear part of the deal. How should we be feeling about this stage in the negotiations compared to where we were several days ago?
Rob's diplomatic track as of right now still has to play itself out. I think it's, a lot of heavy lifting lie ahead, no doubt about that. But at the same time, there's a lot that needs to be negotiated. People tend to forget 47 years of bad blood, of differences, multiple files that need to be dealt with. Absolutely, the nuclear issue is the most important, but there are many other files, including what's happening in the region, Iran's proxy network, if you will, the fate of that, missiles, and you could go on. You could even add what's happening inside of Iran. The situation with the human rights inside that country could become something that will be discussed somewhere along the line. But for now, it seems that it's a focus on two issues: the fate of Iran's nuclear program and obviously the Strait of Hormuz. And I think if you focus on that and if you have success there, you can build on it. But in the meantime, as you just heard Abbas Aslani from Tehran say, both sides are obviously still in the business of posturing, and they do so as far as being stronger in negotiations. But that shouldn't mislead us in thinking negotiations are likely to collapse anytime soon. But that is posturing to go in these next round of talks, hoping that they get the maximum of the points that each side brings to the table.
Given the increase in diplomatic efforts, I mean, should that make us more confident, do you think, that at least an extension of the ceasefire could be on the table before anything else?
The extension almost is essential to happen at this point. I mean, we're only a week away, and if anybody thinks that these negotiations are going to result in anything substantive covering all sorts of issues within a week, again, that is, I think, unrealistic, reminding everyone that in 2015, when Iran and the U.S. and the other world powers reached a deal, it took a year and a half, and that was just focused on nuclear file only. Today, the Vice President of the United States is talking about a grand bargain. The Iranians are talking about political guarantees. They're speaking a very different language. They're speaking about political trust, not just a narrow pathway towards a nuclear deal. So, if that's going to happen, that means what you saw in Islamabad last weekend, 21 hours, multiply that by hundreds. And by the way, one thing that's really important that didn't happen over the last few years is they're actually bringing experts. They're bringing all sorts of experts to these talks. Sanctions relief experts, nuclear non-proliferation experts, you name it. And that suggests to me certainly that we're at a much more of a serious phase in these talks than we were when Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff led those two sets of talks brokered by Oman over the last year.
Yeah, we can't forget, Alex, of course, that to the backdrop to all of this is Israel's attacks on Hezbollah targets, it says, in Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu issuing statements saying that he is a lot more cautious about where this is likely to head. What's your assessment about where Israel stands in all of this?
Israel is not in a position to really shape the outcome right now. I know there's a lot of discussions here in the United States that Israel is a spoiler. But at the end of the day, I think Donald Trump wants to see if this diplomatic track is going to work. And if he can convince himself that he's on a winner here, then he has no choice really to tell Netanyahu to follow along with him, because Israel is better off staying with the United States than going alone when it comes to dealing with the Iranian regime.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Vatanka there from the Middle East Institute. As always, thank you. Well, as we've just been talking about, the Israeli Prime Minister says it is too early to say whether there will be progress in the talks between the US and Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Israel is prepared for any scenario if fighting with Iran resumes. Well, joining us now from Jaffa is Abed Abu Sharan, a political commentator. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. I want to get your opinion about where Benjamin Netanyahu and where Israel stand on the issue as we are potentially heading towards a second round of negotiations.
First of all, thank you for having me. This was probably one of the harshest weeks for Benjamin Netanyahu, especially because of the ceasefire, but not only, also because of what's happening in Europe, losing a significant coalition with Hungary. Concerning the recent developments, especially with Iran, I think what's more important is what didn't appear and Netanyahu didn't mention in his latest video. He talked about three things. The first one is the enriched uranium capabilities and enrichment capabilities. And the third thing was the Strait of Hormuz. He didn't say anything about regime change, ballistic missiles, or Iran supporting militant groups in this region. And this shows the expectation of Netanyahu from the ongoing ceasefire talks. Now, this is also happening while Netanyahu, by the end of the year, has elections. The polls, especially after the ceasefire, are not good for Netanyahu. He lost about 10% of the vote, almost losing a significant part of the margin that he needs to lead the coalition. And now he needs a good outcome in the ceasefire talk.
Stay with me just for a second, Abed, because I want to talk a little bit more about the situation between Israel and Lebanon. Now, Israel's Prime Minister is saying that he's told the military to continue its invasion in southern Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu says the military is striking Iran's ally Hezbollah as part of a plan to put in place a security zone in the south. On Wednesday, the Israeli army intensified its airstrikes and artillery shelling on towns and villages in southern Lebanon, resulting in the killing of 4 paramedics. Since the beginning of March, Israeli attacks on Lebanon have killed more than 2,000 people. More than 1.2 million others have been forced out of their homes. Abed, just in the last 24 hours, we've been seeing what are being billed as historic talks between the government of Lebanon and the government of Israel in order to try to find some sort of resolution to the situation that's currently going on, particularly in southern Lebanon. But at the same time, we are seeing these attacks continuing. What's the assessment, do you think, of whether or not Israel is actually intending to eventually get some sort of ceasefire, some sort of downing of arms by Hezbollah, or is it just simply buying time?
The biggest failure from the Israeli perspective is Hezbollah, and especially northern Lebanon. Israel didn't hold its bargain when it came to the ceasefire that was signed by November 2024. The Israeli military bombed Hezbollah's military infrastructure, but still, in the beginning of the war with Iran, Hezbollah was showing military capabilities. For the Israeli public, this is a catastrophe. Netanyahu has promised, especially the Israelis at the northern part of Israel, bordering Lebanon, that they would be safe to go back to their homes. Now it's been 6 weeks, and still they're being bombarded. The other part is Israel is extremely worried of Iranian influence in Lebanon. Their key interest right now is to neutralize any Iranian influence over Lebanon and Lebanese politics. And now, with the ceasefire happening in Islamabad and Iran being able to pressure the U.S. to start pressuring Israel on some sort of ceasefire in Lebanon, this isn't good news. And now they're trying to shift a new strategy that they've been having in the West Bank of neutralizing Hezbollah with Lebanese government to start some sort of negotiation in order just to keep on negotiation, but adding a very important element, and this is the security coordination. From the Israeli perspective, they don't mind any civil war breaking in Lebanon. On the contrary, they see something strategically good. Their key point right now is trying to find a way to disarm Hezbollah while having negotiation with the Lebanese government.
Abed Dabo Shahade, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for giving us the benefit of your expertise in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Going to take a look at some of the day's other news now. At least 8 children have been killed in a shooting at a secondary school in southeastern Turkey. Police say a teacher was also killed. The suspected shooter is dead. More than a dozen other people were wounded. The attack comes a day after a separate school shooting in a nearby province injured 16 people. Serim Kosiolo is following developments from Istanbul.
Witnessing 2 school shootings in 48 hours is like a shock for the Turkish people, because school shootings do not happen often in Turkey. However, Wednesday's school shooting ended with 4 casualties, killing 3 students and 1 teacher. Since Tuesday's shooting, when a 16-year-old teenager attacked the school and wounded several people, families have been concerned about the safety and security of their children. Teachers are afraid of their lives, and some of them even were on strike on Wednesday. Now the debate is around the gun control and the internet and youth mental issue. In Turkey, the gun laws are already very strict. You cannot have or carry a gun without an official license, but apparently children may have access to their own families' licensed guns. This must be questioned according to the experts, and it seems easy to access guns in the last couple of years, especially to pump rifles and prop guns. These are the questions need to be answered, but families are concerned. Serim Kosiolo, Al Jazeera, Istanbul.
International donors have pledged more than $1.5 billion worth of aid for Sudan at a meeting in Berlin. But the Sudanese government says it rejects any outcome of the meeting because it wasn't consulted. More than a dozen foreign ministers attended, including from France and the UK and the US. The EU, the African Union and Sudanese civil society groups were also there. Sudan's foreign ministry says holding a conference without consulting the government is a colonial approach. Well, it's been 3 years since the war in Sudan began, and it's a conflict that's created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 34 million people, that's almost 2 out of every 3, now need humanitarian support. Since the war started, around 14 million people have been forced out of their homes. An estimated 19 million school-aged children are without access to education. Nearly 70% of hospitals and health facilities in conflict areas are no longer functioning. And estimates suggest that the war may have killed more than 150,000 people. Well, joining us now from Berlin is Hamid Khalafallah. He's a Sudan policy analyst. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So Sudan's government is saying that these talks, as they're describing it, are taking a colonial tutelage approach where Western companies can impose their own agenda. Now, if Khartoum is not part of the process, what incentive is it going to have to listen?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And I think, the Sudanese de facto government, the Sudanese Armed Forces government, there's no reason, in my opinion, for them to be consulted. They are a party to the war. They're one of the warring factions and so on. And they tend to forget that they have no constitutional, background or framework to claim the role of the state in any way. And that is one side of the problem. But I think, the conference in Berlin has so many issues. It's very far from being perfect for so many reasons, but not for the reasons that the Sudanese Armed Forces government are quoting. Well, obviously, you would also ask, like you said, how do you get them to commit to whatever outcomes come out of the Berlin conference? The Berlin conference is not a peace mediation platform, and it has not promised that, and it's not concerned with that. If it's a peace mediation talks and attempts, then you would need to have the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces as the warring parties to commit to a ceasefire or to commit to a cessation of hostilities or whatever is being discussed. But at the moment, what happens in Berlin does not concern them, and it's actually very good. One of the positive things that came out of Berlin is that it recentered the narrative and refocused the attention on the Sudanese war to the civilian side rather than the warring parties.
International donors apparently have pledged more than $1.5 billion worth of aid for Sudan. That sounds like a lot of money, but then when you take into consideration the numbers that we're talking about, how concerned are you that conferences like this are still eventually going to fall short of the aid that people need?
I mean, honestly, from experiences, we know that, unfortunately, that this is going to fall short anyway. We have seen pledging conferences in Paris in 2023 and in London in 2024. In Paris in 2024 and in London in 2025. And now we're seeing Berlin in 2026. And the ones in Paris and in London, a lot of the pledges did not make it to the system anyway, and they don't leave the conference rooms where these pledges were made. But the other larger problem is who is this money going to? If it goes to the UN agencies and the large international humanitarian organizations that are unable to reach those who need it the most inside Sudan and who have a lot of bureaucratic hurdles in terms of working with local respondents like the emergency response rooms and other mutual aid groups and so on the ground, then that money becomes useless. It does not really reach those who are most in need. And even if all of it reaches those who are in need and so on, the actual need is almost double the figure that was committed today. So honestly, as much as more humanitarian support is welcome, but this still falls very much shy in terms of the need of the Sudanese people suffering for 3 years in this war.
Hamid Khalafallah, Sudan policy analyst. We appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much indeed. This is Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the ceasefire and the war between the US, Israel and Iran. A reminder of the latest developments. A Pakistani delegation led by the army chief and interior ministers arrived in Iran. Diplomatic efforts are intensifying to end the US-Israeli war with Iran. The delegation is set to deliver messages from the United States. The White House says the US is not seeking to extend the ceasefire agreement with Iran, which expires in a week. The latest diplomatic push follows heightened tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's armies warned it will block trade through the Red Sea as well as the Gulf and Sea of Oman if the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports continues. At least 9 people, including 8 children, have been killed in a shooting